Hello and welcome to this episode of For Our Liberation, the latest iteration of my podcast. And the first episode that I'm publishing is a pretty good one, if I do say so myself. So in this episode, I am in conversation with a lady called Laura Hartley. Now, I found Laura when I found myself Googling the topic of internalized capitalism. And I think this had been brought to my attention, this concept, this idea, by another coach that I was working with, a lady called Kelly Deals, when I was working through her program and kind of came to a realization that the inner voice, my own inner voice, was really my taskmaster. It wasn't my managers at work, or anybody else that I worked with at all who were telling me that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't working hard enough, I wasn't doing well enough. All of it was coming from my own inner voice. In fact, my own inner voice was way harsher than anybody outside of me could ever have been. And Kelly quite rightly indicated to me that, yeah, that's your internalized capitalist right there, telling you that you're not working hard enough, you're not doing well enough, you're not following the rules well enough. And that got me going down a little rabbit hole, and Googling, and I found Laura. She had written an article about internalized capitalism, and connected from her, no, connected with her from that, and then found myself on a course that she was running, all about internalized capitalism and how to undo it. And I really wanted to share her wisdom with you on this podcast. So, um, by means of an introduction to Laura and what she does and her work, she is a leadership coach, and a founder of the Scintilla Centre. It's a very recent iteration of her work, which is a space that equips change makers with the skills, wisdom, and community to reimagine the world and foster deep change. She's fascinated by the space between inner and outer change and melds systems thinking and inner work to empower change makers with the skills of getting free, unlearning capitalism and patriarchy from the inside out, which is pretty much what I went to her for. Um, so alongside this episode, which is full of gold, and if you haven't really encountered the idea of internalized capitalism, this is going to perhaps rock your world, um, as it certainly did mine. Kind of unravels a lot of the systems and structures that we've been conditioned by, and leaves you thinking, oh my God, how did I get sucked in by that? And also, okay, how do I do life differently? And that's definitely going to be a theme of the podcast going forward. And along those lines, I encountered a post on Instagram that I wanted to share with you that really sums up quite beautifully the whole issue with internalized capitalism. It's from a lady called pat.radical.therapist, if you want to look her up. And it's called The Body Under Capitalism, a Nervous System in Revolt. And I guess why this really appealed to me is because I have experienced burnout. My system is still in a state of chronic stress, and I am working on, for want of a better word, um, undoing that, healing my nervous system as far as I can, because I know somehow that that is the root of much of my dis-ease, whether that be physical illness or general unhappiness or general lack of joy in my life. And so this is why her um, her post caught my eye. So the body under capitalism, a nervous system in revolt. Your body was never meant to live like this. Under capitalism, your nervous system is forced to navigate a world that treats rest as laziness, productivity as the only measure of worth, and scarcity as a constant state. The relentless pace, deadlines, bills, unpaid labor, hustle culture pushes your body to its limits, then demands more. It's a system designed to keep you in survival mode, where exhaustion is normalized and burnout is inevitable. Capitalism hijacks your nervous system, flooding it with stress hormones as you respond to never-ending demands. You wake up tired, not because you didn't sleep enough, but because the weight of being useful to the system never lets you fully rest. You feel your heart race when you open your inbox or check your bank account. Your stomach tightens at the thought of not doing enough, not being enough. This system creates a world where your fight or flight response becomes your baseline. Rest, a luxury. Joy, a fleeting moment stolen between shifts. Community, an afterthought when you're told self-sufficiency is the only way to survive. Even your pleasure and leisure are commodified, marketed back to you in bite-sized doses that never fill the void. Capitalism thrives by breaking your connection to your body. It teaches you to ignore your needs, skip lunch for meetings, push through the pain, silence your instincts that scream for slowness. It turns your body into a tool, a means to produce for someone else's gain. And when your body can no longer perform, you are discarded, blamed, made to feel like a failure for not keeping up. The weight of capitalism doesn't just live in your mind, it burrows into your body. The chronic aches, the tension in your shoulders, the knot in your stomach, they are symptoms of a system that demands everything and gives nothing. The nervous system wasn't built for this. It was built for connection, for community, for cycles of activity and rest, for safety. Under capitalism, safety is a privilege. Rest is resistance. Slowing down is rebellion. To care for your nervous system under this system is to reject its lies. It's saying no to grind culture. It's choosing rest even when it feels impossible. It's reconnecting to community, to pleasure, to practices that remind your body it is more than a tool. It's remembering that your worth is inherent, not earned through productivity. Your nervous system wants to heal, to find its rhythm outside the chaos. The question is not how you adapt to capitalism, but how you dismantle the ways it lives in you. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but that hits a lot of nails on the head for me, for sure. And I feel like it's a post I'm going to go through and and perhaps expand on in future podcasts and future Substacks, because I feel like this is the work of our time. And unfortunately, it's on our each of our shoulders to do that work. Nobody is going to come along and say, do you know what? That capitalism, it's causing a few problems. Should we just do away with it? So it does come down to individuals and individuals within community to rebel, to resist, to choose another way. And that is no mean feat when it feels like there is no choice more often than not. Um, but yeah, I hope that that gives you a little bit of an insight into the conversation that is to come, and I hope that you get a huge amount of wisdom, insight, gold from this conversation with Laura. I'm very, very glad that I found her and that she came into my life. And really, yeah, really hoping that this will open some some new ways of thinking, some new ways of being for you that will enable you to start living your life in a more pleasurable and joyful way and disconnecting yourself and dismantling um, capitalism. So, without further ado, please do go ahead, enjoy the episode. I will put all the links to Laura's work in the show notes. Um, and yeah, I'd love to hear how this lands with you. So, welcome, Laura, to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you as a guest. I really think the topic of internalized capitalism is just going to be a really, really fascinating and important one for people to hear about. But before we get into that, let's start with you. If you would like to give a bit of an introduction to who you are, the kind of work that you do, and kind of how you came to be doing that work.
Oh my gosh. First of all, thank you for having me here. Second, a big question.
Yeah.
Uh,
Who are you? Yeah.
so, yes, my name is Laura Hartley. I am a leadership coach for change makers and climate activists. So, basically, for people who want to make a real difference in the world. I think a lot of my work kind of stems from this question of how do we create a better world? I think it's this question that I've been fascinated by for a really long time. And it's taken different like iterations in different stages of my life. I've been in a climate and environmental activist, so there's always this big topic of discussion that I find so juicy around systems and cities and how can we redesign things and reimagine things to be, more enjoyable for us as humans. But there's also this other dimension of the question as well, which is kind of the inner component, is what actually needs to happen within us as individuals and human beings for us to really develop that sense of possibility, meaning, fulfillment, joy that, we all want to be in this world. So my work is about pulling on these different threads and starting to ask the question of, well, what are the skills, the leadership, the wisdom, the imagination, the community that we need to be developing in this time in order to make a real difference?
Hmm. I love that you talk about kind of how to make the world a more enjoyable place for us to live in as humans. And I think that's kind of something that we probably don't really think about very much. Like, hang on a minute, just stop for 1 second. How much do I actually enjoy this environment, the pace of life, all of those kinds of things? And then, like you say, also the internal side of joy and meaning. Um, yeah, I think
Well, yeah,
the two are connected, right?
absolutely. I think we tend to see them as siloed things, right? That somehow, that's just for outside, right? If we just design the right policies and the right structures and the right innovation, the rest will follow. And no, we have an inner world. We have an inner dimension. We have stories that we've learned from family, from friends. We have, personal callings and vocations. We all have this kind of spiritual essence to us as well that is always searching for something bigger, something a bit deeper. And,
Mm.
if we only do the inner work and fail to look at the outer, then I think we're missing half the puzzle. The two are always in relationship with each other. I think that's one of the things that I like about this work and asking these questions is you get to kind of explore so many different places.
Mm. Yeah, and I think certainly I would say what I'm trying to unlearn for myself is the idea that all of the change needs to happen inside me, as in, there must be something that I need to change or fix in order to be able to thrive in the world that is around us. Whereas actually, as you say, no, there's probably some things that we need to adjust in our external environment, as well as looking at our internal environment in order for us to really thrive. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think this is one of the gaps when we're talking about personal development and spiritual teachings and any of these kind of spaces that talk about our inner worlds. There is such wonderful work there that is really transformative and has changed my life. And that is a big part of what I teach and practice and work with. And sometimes we talk about that neglecting the very real role that the environment around us plays, right? That politics plays, that policies play, that the built environment around us plays, that the way we structure our working lives plays. So there is as a collective. I say that not just as individuals. So there is this kind of inner and outer connection that I think is asking to be explored, and that sometimes gets missed when we just think about self-development.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely over the past maybe 6, maybe 12 months where I've just really, again, started to make that connection and be like, hang on a minute, like, just this needs, the way we live needs to change. It's not just about me. And I think some of that kind of personal development, self-development, all has kind of fallen into the capitalist patriarchal trap of individualism and putting the onus, the responsibility on the individual. Meanwhile, the politicians and the wealthiest 1% can just carry on extracting, while we're all busy trying to fix ourselves because we think that we're the problem. Yeah.
Absolutely. And like this is the thing, there is work to do within ourselves. Like that is such a component of this. And it is also out there. So there is, I sometimes use this phrase, and I can't remember who may have said this, but like, self-help without collective liberation is just capitalism in disguise. When we, as you're saying, have this emphasis purely on the individual, that all of the struggles that you face will just be on your shoulders. It's your problem that you're burnt out or exhausted. It's your problem that you're not feeling the meaning or the connection that you'd like to have. These things haven't arrived out of nowhere. They're systemic problems. Far too many of us are feeling like we are disconnected from ourselves, from our communities, from our hearts, from our families. Far too many of us are feeling like we just don't have the resilience or the perseverance or the energy that we once had to be able to kind of find things. A lot of us feel that we don't have the same creativity or imagination that we once had. These things are not just individual problems, they're symptoms of larger things that are happening in our society and world. And so I think starting to make that link gives a little bit of freedom there to start to work with them and to change them and shift them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've started to take a few steps here into the topic of internalized capitalism. We've mentioned the C word already, so and that's kind of what I really wanted you to share on this podcast. So if there are people listening like me, I hadn't really heard the term internalized capitalism until probably a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago. Um, how would you describe what internalized capitalism is?
So I think before I can explain what internalized capitalism is, we probably need to touch on what actually is capitalism,
Yeah,
right, as a whole.
yeah.
And, capitalism is obviously the economic system that I would say probably most of us listening to live within or live under. But it's also an ideology, right? It is also a cultural idea. And the story or the system of capitalism is really built on three different pillars. The first is its definition of success. So the ideology of capitalism says that the only goal worth pursuing is growth. So it cares about infinite growth on a finite planet. It's one of the reasons that, as a climate activist, we say it's one of the biggest drivers of the climate crisis, just because when you're constantly needing that level of growth, it also needs to come usually from resource extraction at
Mhm.
some level.
Yeah.
And growth, it's an interesting term. Like we use it so much in self-help work a lot of the time, right? That, oh, we can be growing. We always see growth as this good thing. But growth isn't something in nature that tends to happen without end. It was Edward Abbey who said that growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell.
Mm.
Much of our world operates in seasons and cycles, and it has this kind of natural maturity point that growth without end doesn't ever seem to reach. So this is kind of the first pillar of capitalism. The second pillar would be the manufactured production of scarcity. Okay, because if growth is your goal, the number one best driver you'll have to achieve growth is scarcity. And this shows up in so many different ways, like all around our system. We see it in marketing, like anything to do with like FOMO or urgency, like
Mm.
there's two rooms and like somebody else is looking, and there's all these
Yeah,
websites that do them. We know them.
yeah.
We can see it in planned obsolescence. So we often
Mm-hmm.
design a lot of our products to be single use, to break, or to be harder to repair. Perhaps that battery is just a little bit inaccessible. And again, it's in order for us to drive consumption. So scarcity is kind of baked into the system. And the third principle of capitalism is the devaluation of like beautiful, living, complex systems like jungles and oceans and forests into like lifeless resources. Okay, so these beautiful living systems only have value when we can take something from them. Now, it might be timber or it might be tourism, but either way, their value is only in our relationship to them and not inherently in their own existence. So we live within a system that is built on the story with these pillars. Okay, so the story is saying we need to be
Yeah.
growing. We always need to be growing. Growth is the goal. Scarcity, there's not enough. You do not have enough. You have not got enough. You will not have enough. Make sure you just keep growing. And that devalues anything living. It's a resource, it's a commodity, it's something to be extracted, and it's something to be used. Now, a lot of these ideas are so normalized in our society that
Mm.
we can't even imagine another way. And what happens is we end up internalizing this story. You know, it's a little bit of chicken or egg here. Does the system come from this cultural story that we carry that says we need to be growing and we don't have enough as we are? Or are we influenced by the system? You know, does living within this system influence our thoughts, our words, our actions? I can't say I fully know the answer to that. But we get to this question of then, what does internalized capitalism look like? What are the effects? What are the messages? What are the stories? What are the patterns that we internalize from living within this system? We're living within this story. And so for me, internalized capitalism is the equation of our worth with our productivity or with what we produce. Right? It is the toxic elements of that same system living out in our thoughts, in our words, in our actions. It is shaping our relationships, our mindsets, our beliefs, our values. And a lot of the time, it's not very generative. It's leading us to quite toxic and unhealthy and certainly not very fulfilling pathways.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, 100%. And yeah, as you were talking about kind of the Earth's resources being something that they're only valuable if we can get something from them, if we can turn them into something like productive, etc. And that's like, and that's also how what we've done to humans, right? Like humans don't have a value unless they are productive, and I think about I'm still very kind of at the early stages of my learning in terms of capitalism and things like that. But looking at universal basic income, and people are like, no, you should have to work for your money. And I'm like, why? Shouldn't we all just deserve to live? Like, and to have our needs met? Like, and for me, that kind of reaction is a very kind of this capitalist reaction, which is, yeah, you only deserve to live if you're being productive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Right. Even the very term cost of living that we throw around now is like absolutely bizarre when you think about it, as a
Mm.
term.
Yeah.
But we live in this world that's kind of like we think it's a meritocracy. We think, well, everybody has the same opportunities, everybody has the same starting points, everyone has the same ability to reach more. And if you just work hard enough, okay, you too will reach that place.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a lovely story that we have, but it's completely untrue. And I think
Mm,
that story is also then what encourages this idea of like, no, you should work for what you have. That it
mm,
makes you a good person to work harder. There's this real sense that we've tied like our work ethic to our worth.
yeah, yeah.
So when I'm talking about internalized capitalism, and we're saying that we equate our worth with our productivity, there are just so many different ways that this shows up for us, right? Think about, and like I'm guilty of all of these. I say this fully upfront. How often we come home and it's like, oh, hey, how was your day? And it was good, but it wasn't long enough. I didn't get enough done. How often like we tie our sense of uh, even the idea of like rest, well, it's okay. If we the idea that maybe rest is something that we need to avoid, or we don't get enough rest, we glorify being busy, or that if we do rest, we're resting in order to do more tomorrow. Okay, if I rest now, I can get even more done. There's so many different dimensions that I certainly could roll off and go through, but it permeates every area of our life.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I would say once I kind of learned that term, internalized capitalism, and had a bit of an idea of what it meant, I was like, I'm the poster child for internalized capitalism. Oh my God. Yeah, like you say, I kind of have a little voice in my head continually telling me I'm not working hard enough, I'm not doing well enough, I'm going to get found out and I'm going to get told off and I'm going to get in big trouble. And yeah, the rest thing. I mean, I work for a corporation at the moment and I see it, I see it in their advertising. They're kind of so important to rest and blah, 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 because you can then be more productive. Like,
Yeah,
no, 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 no,
absolutely.
no. That's not the point of rest. But it it's just so ingrained. This like we need to be productive.
Absolutely. And like we do the same thing even with mindfulness, right? So
Hmm.
like mindfulness is a transformative practice. Like, it's something I return to, it's something I teach. And yet, if you Google it, like I guarantee you, you're going to find an article on like 5 ways it can make you more productive. And so we just start to, capitalism has this incredible ability to like kind of fold into it anything that might subvert it. And so
Yeah.
that includes any of these spiritual practices, it includes rest, it includes all of these different dimensions, which are not about growth, which are not about, the endless pursuit of more. One of
Mm.
the other examples of how this shows up is that sense of time scarcity. This one's like all over my language. I'm so guilty of this, but we say things like, oh, there's just not enough time, or like, oh, it's fine, I can squeeze it in, or like, I wasted an hour in this meeting. So, like, time becomes this commodity that we're wasting, we're squeezing, we're losing. And it's something that we're always racing against. And like, time, that isn't the only understanding of time. And I don't think it's our best embrace of the time that we actually have on this planet. But yet it's something that we're always like, there's never quite enough. And so that scarcity is starting to permeate into the areas of our lives, encouraging us to move faster, work harder, just keep pushing on, resilience as endurance, and then the
Mm.
message keeps going until a lot of people hit exhaustion.
Yeah. I love that resilience as endurance kind of when you for those who are listening, I'm doing a course with Laura at the moment, and yeah, when you kind of mentioned that in the homework, I actually had to go and look up the dictionary definitions of what's the difference between resilience and endurance, and I kind of realized that resilience is meant to be kind of like almost momentary, and you can be being able to bounce back from something was really hard, whereas endurance is just like being able to keep going and going and going and going and going, and then there's no sense of bouncing back or having any kind of respite with endurance. So yeah, it's
Keep
very
calm and
interesting.
carry on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
um I mean, I think we've already got into that as well, which was going to be my next point, was around kind of what the consequences of internalized capitalism. I think you've already mentioned the B word, burnout, and I've definitely been there myself. Yeah, but what have you seen in your experience of the consequences of, I guess, for individuals and also for the collective?
Mm. Well, yeah, and I think that these are two different and important and valid areas that we start to see the impact of this. The first as individuals usually is burnout, as we're talking about.
Mm.
When you are acting from a place that you devalue the beautiful living complex system that is your body, right? So I'm not noticing any of the signs or the warning signals that it's giving me, like the tension in my shoulders or the ache at the back of my head. Like I'm just going to keep going. I can rest when I have that next vacation in 3 months' time or on the weekend, whenever it might be. We're overriding those signs. We're going to end up depleted. The same when we have this mentality that, well, it makes sense that we would struggle to step back from any of this if we're equating our worth with our productivity. Okay, because who am I?
Mm.
Do I have meaning? Do I have value if I step back from doing what I'm doing? If maybe I'm not indispensable at work? If maybe I'm not saying yes to everything that comes my way? If I disappoint people by saying no, Will I still matter? Will I still belong? We have based a lot of our systems of belonging around what people do. And that is a problem, because that's when we start to get that identity piece, and it means it's hard to step back. So the inevitable consequence of living in the story of burnout, of living in the story of capitalism is burnout. I think it's really important that we start to do this work for us as individuals to get free and to unlearn this story. But I also think that there is another consequence, and that is that really we live at a very pivotal point in the world. We live in a stage when so much around us is collapsing and transforming, and not always in positive ways. Certainly when we look at the climate crisis, there is huge disruption to come because of this. In order for us to make meaningful change in the world, and certainly for us to address one of the root causes of the climate crisis, which is the economic system that we live in, we have to do the work of unlearning that economic system. We have to do the work of unlearning this story of capitalism. This is part of systems change. So often when we start to think about changing the world or changing a big economic system or changing a big cultural system, we're like, oh my God, it's so big. Who am I to do that? I'm just one person. It's all the way out there. Surely that is for the economists and the activists and the politicians. And no, if it was, we wouldn't be in this space that we're in now as a world collectively. So I think that it is important, and that there is work for us to do here as change makers in unlearning the system in order for us to generatively create something new.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
And let me know if that makes sense or if that doesn't make
No,
sense there.
it absolutely makes sense. As you were talking as well, I was thinking about, of course, burnout is an inevitable consequence of living in the systems we live in and internalized capitalism. Because if you're, you know, I kind of always think about the earth and the human as basically the same, if that makes sense, in terms of how you need to treat them in order for them to thrive. So, what we're finding now with capitalism is like you were describing at the beginning, growth, 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 growth. It means extraction, 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 extraction. And I think people haven't made that connection between like financial growth and that actually that at some point that always means we're going to extract some resources, whereas that they are intrinsically connected. And I was just, as you were talking, was thinking, well, of course, as a human, we're just we're extracting our energy, and we're not listening, like you say, to the signs that our body is giving us. It'll start with a whisper and it'll end up with a shout, which is definitely where my body got to. And we don't rest enough. And also, as we were saying before, we rest in order to be productive, not in order to just be and to behave as we're meant to behave as humans in order to thrive, which is that we're meant to have a combination of work and play and rest. It's not meant to be all work and all extraction, because it's only going to end
We
one
are
way.
animals, right?
Yeah.
We're nature. Like, we are not
Yeah.
separate from the living world and how everything else on this planet operates. And
Yeah.
we sometimes have this idea that we are, but we're
Mm.
not. And so it's not just about the ideas that we've been taught that we're supposed to, grow up and get the right degree and get the right job and follow the right path and marry the right person and do all of this until eventually you'll reach this place, and in that place you will be done and you will be happy. And it's a lovely story, but it's completely
It's
incompatible
not
with
true.
with reality. And
Yeah.
that actually we're very complex beings. That our purpose in this life, I think, is far deeper than that story can encapsulate. I think our purpose is also unique to each of us. I think that we do need, as you're saying, play and joy and fun. And so when I'm talking about this work of unlearning internalized capitalism, there is always this, what we're talking about is returning to what is authentic, right? Returning to what is true, returning to what is reality, returning to what is actually generative and positive and enjoy building within each of us. And I think unless we start to do this work that is really about going to the root, right, then one, the systems of the world will continue to recreate themselves.
Yeah.
You know, I sometimes to go down to give another perspective on this. I think when we're talking about capitalism, it benefits from its inevitable consequence of burnout. Because what happens when we're burnt out is we can't challenge it. We don't have
Mm.
the energy. We can't imagine new things when we're burnt out. Our creativity is usually at our least. And so we don't have the energy to coordinate and to work with others and to find new ways. And so we have to be going to the root of this, both for us as individuals and then for us as a collective.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like quite often it's like a spiral that we just keep going round and round and round in this spiral, thinking that if we just do whatever we've been doing better, then it'll work. And it's just like it's a trap. Like it's never going to work because I feel like the pace of our lives, um, again, like you were saying with burnout, it serves capitalism because it's kind of like, okay, let's create lots of convenience. Everybody thinks great, brilliant convenience. I'm down for that, whether it be, like dishwasher and all those kinds of things. And I can spend the time that I would have been washing the dishes doing something else. And then you kind of cram more and more stuff into your life. And then you think, I need a bit more convenience. And this is how we've got to this point where, like you were saying, most people, whether even if they're not burnt out, they just don't have the time to just stop and reflect and say, hang on a minute, or to try and do things differently. I always think, I'm a single woman with no children, and I still find it tricky to be like, I'm going to go to the farm shop and buy as much of my food as I possibly can, instead of getting somebody to drive my food to my door, which then also takes away any interaction that you might have with your community because you're just interacting with the delivery driver. Um, just small things like that, where it is like, okay, well, I need to just unpick here. I need to recognize I can't do all of those things. I'm going to have to change the way that I'm structuring my life in order to impact the way that the world is working. And I agree with what you were saying earlier about it's not the politicians and the activists and all those, it's the individual. Even where I work, I say to my colleagues sometimes, if we all just said no, we're not doing that in terms of working the long hours, what would they do? Like, they would have to find another way, right? And it's kind of the same with individuals. If we all just stopped buying from certain people, certain companies, um, etc., then those companies would either change or die.
Yeah. But and I think we forget that that's how the weekend was created, because of groups of people, of unions of people who actually demanded better conditions.
Mm,
And could we have even better than we have? I think we could. I think certainly when we're looking at the future, we so often think these things as you're talking about a time saving, right? Whether it's dishwasher, whether it is like food on the go, whether it's
hmm.
AI, we're
Yeah,
starting to see this conversation come in. And these things do have the potential to free up human time and for us to use it for something meaningful. But our systems don't allow us to use it for
yeah.
something meaningful. I think that there are power structures that benefit from it staying the way that it is. And so it requires us to
Mm.
have this, both unlearning journey of the system within ourselves, okay? Because the system's never just out there, it lives in me. It's why it's deeply uncomfortable when I rest. I feel really like, oh, this doesn't feel right, you know?
Yeah,
And that we work together collectively to kind of challenge the system and to reimagine it. This is the work of this time, this both and in both spaces.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's tricky. It's tricky. So, I mean, that was going to be one of my other questions. So how do we go about undoing this internalized capitalism?
I think tricky is the right word here. Because what we're looking at is like a cultural story that has colonized our mindset or permeated our mindset. Um, and that takes practice to unlearn.
Hmm.
I use
Yeah.
this term for this called getting free. And I use that term because I think that's kind of what it is. We're kind of shackled into a certain way of believing things and seeing the world and acting in a certain way. We've tied our self-worth with, what we're doing and how much we're doing and what other people will think of what we're doing. And so there is this kind of getting free of that. But getting free is never one moment. It's not the big bathe in the river or like the moment of enlightenment. I think it's a lot less sexy than that. It's kind of the day by day work of like noticing the story, noticing the pattern, and choosing a different path. So a lot of this comes back to, in a sense, mindfulness. Where do I notice this in me when I feel uncomfortable just resting? Perhaps even I'm sick and maybe I just don't feel like I can take a sick day. Or I'm going to work from home if I'm sick, which is still working. Like we have sick days, we can take them. And I'm going to notice that. And I'm going to do what actually I think is in alignment with my well-being, where I'm going to notice perhaps what actually feels good within me. Maybe when I notice my body and I think about saying no to like this project that I really don't want to do and that somebody has asked me to, and it would really just be me volunteering my time, I'm going to notice like, oh, if I think about saying no, do my shoulders come down? Does my chest open up? Do I feel like that sigh come out? And I'm going to do what's uncomfortable and follow what feels good. And a lot of the time, this is uncomfortable work because we have not been conditioned or taught to follow this or to trust our bodies or to trust our inner wisdom or to, especially as women, to set boundaries without consequences. And yet this is the work that we have to do. So it is uncomfortable, but ultimately I think is leading in the direction of feeling good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've started to experience as you described, it's the tiny moments of undoing. Like I, had what am I, 44? So, I've had a long time for the for the capitalism to kind of get into the mindset. And yeah, definitely was a lot worse than I am now. Definitely when I was kind of in my late 20s, early 30s, like on that career ladder, who knows where the ladder goes, what's at the top of it, I've no idea. But yeah, I had an early life crisis, which I guess I'm reasonably grateful for because I started a bit earlier than a lot of people. But even now, like I have a cold. I've cancelled all kinds of other things in my life, but I have not taken any time off work. Like nothing. Um, and sometimes, yeah, sometimes as well. I noticed myself a few months ago. I think I was just feeling really rough, like really bad period pains. And I was kind of sitting there at my desk, like trying to work, like to look through emails. And then I just had this moment of, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. Go and lie on the sofa and wait for the period pains to pass. You do not sit at your desk and try to be productive. No,
Yeah.
you go and you let your body have what it needs, which was probably like an hour of just, letting those period pains pass instead of just being hunched miserably at my desk. But that is quite a radical act, it's a small act, but it's actually quite a radical thing to do and uncomfortable.
Yeah, all of those things, right? Because, it invites disapproval and invites somebody to say, you're not working hard enough. It
Yeah,
invites somebody to say, oh, yeah, but are you really in that much pain? Is it really that bad that you can't do this? So it instills that kind of fear of like, oh, weakness, or maybe I'm not good enough,
yeah, yeah.
and we want to keep up. We want to have these ideas of ourselves. And so we push through, but that is the small radical act of just stepping away. It isn't always the big things. It's in these small moments. I wish I
Mm,
could say that there was some big reckoning where all of this comes together. That has not been my experience yet. I
yeah.
think it's just in, there it is. You're right. I'm just overriding myself. I'm overriding my needs, my boundaries, my desires. I don't choose that today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I'm late to the game in terms of all of this work, and yet I'm also at the forefront, like in terms of being like my colleagues and things. I'm definitely kind of one of the ones like leading the way in terms of saying, well, no, like rest, like that. Why are you trying to keep working when you're absolutely, on the floor, crawling on the floor? You can't, you're almost dead, but you're still trying to keep working because it is, as you say, it's that kind of, oh, you can't cut it, or then your colleagues are going to think less of you, or think, yeah, probably don't really want, yeah, a bit of a slacker, maybe,
Right? Yeah.
yeah.
It's nice for them, but yeah, they don't work that hard. Very good when they do, but exactly. And here's the thing, this isn't just about paid work either. This will apply just as equally to unpaid work. And I started really reflecting on this experience within myself. It was when I was very much engaged in unpaid climate activism. And I saw it in a lot of the people that I would organize with, that we would, we would all work full-time jobs. I was building a business as well. And yet here we were at like 10 p.m. at night on a different organizing call. And yes, I can do this next thing. And yes, I'll be here at this event. And yes, it's fine. I can take that on until somebody else does. And there is a place for effort and for hard work and for stepping up into difficult circumstances. It's not to say that never exists, but that was our default. That was our modus operandi. And it's
Mm,
just when we are living and working from that space, in whatever way it may be, it might even be in our personal lives, just saying yes to everything around us. That isn't coming from a place of inner security. That's not coming from our deepest parts of ourselves. That's not coming from our callings and our vocations and our spiritual lives. That is coming from the world around us. I often say that capitalism and patriarchy demand two things of women. First, that they never stop producing, and second, that their needs never come first. Somebody else's needs always will. And so we have to consider these things from the culture that we're coming from.
mm. Yeah, I think I would also add to that, just from my personal experience, like intuition gets kind of parked. Like, no, park intuition. Logic is what we need, and that's how we end up. Like, certainly my burnout was part hard work or too much work, but part my intuition saying this is not where you're meant to be. This is not what you're meant to be doing. And me resisting that, because it was like, but this is kind of something that I can get validated by the system for. And also, that's scary. I don't know what the other options are, kind of, yeah.
And that's the thing. I think a lot of the time we aren't actually following what's necessarily true for us. A lot
Mm,
of the time we don't have the space in our lives to even interrogate what that is. And so we end up, you're right, ignoring that little voice in the back of our head that says, yeah, but this thing that you keep thinking about, what about that? That idea that you've had for like 5, 6, 7 years now that you just keep coming back to, it's fine. It's still percolating. I'm not ready yet. And so we ignore it and we keep going. But
mm,
that little voice is a source of wisdom. We need to listen to it. That's life. That is the essence of, I think, what it means to be human, is to have that voice and to be able to follow it. That leads us to calling and vocation and to all of these beautiful things that we can be doing.
mm. And to trust it, learning to trust it. I've kind of, started just playing with that a little bit, like following the intuition, like in just certain decisions that I've made where I've made it out of logic and it went horribly wrong. Okay, next time I'm going to listen to my intuition, and then it goes beautifully right. And it's almost like I need to write it down in a book. Okay, remember that time when it actually went quite well, when I followed my intuition. Yeah,
All of this work is a practice,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
None of this is the big moment and then we've got it and then we trust our intuition and I never doubt it again. I think life is a spiral. So often we find ourselves in those similar circumstances repeatedly, even when we're like, oh, I thought I learned that lesson. And I'm like, it's not a grade that you're passing. I think it's just that spiral of life where we're kind of greeting ourselves and greeting these moments again, and maybe from a different perspective and different opportunities.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Definitely have lessons that come round. But also there is that idea of, the lessons thing feels a bit kind of like perpetual growth, you know?
Right. And look,
Yeah.
again, when we're talking about growth and, just the obsession with growth, we can even see it in health and fitness. We see it in like a lot of gym culture that, you have to like smash it and leave everything on the floor. You know, self-help is often about like you always need to be growing, you always need to be bettering yourself. And like these are lovely ideas, but that's also not the same thing as liberation. It is not the same thing as well-being. It is not the same thing as happiness or harmony, you know, or even discovery and getting to know ourselves. There's so much other language that we can put around this that we often forget because we're just like, no, I need to be improving, right? I
Yeah.
always want to be growing as a person. And I don't know, I don't think growth looks always like an upward linear trajectory, at least in my eyes. Maybe it's a
Mm,
deepening that we're after instead.
yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of what was coming to mind there is it's not the same as living. Like I had a moment a couple of years ago where I had just done so much personal growth stuff and I was like, do you know what? Next year, nothing. No courses. I am not allowed to do any courses at all. What if I was okay exactly as I am? Like, oh, you know,
I I remember having a similar radical thought years ago. And, look, I've spent a lot of my life moving through different personal development circles. And certainly I've spent a lot of years in therapy and things that have absolutely transformed my life and that have made me so much better. But I remember also reaching this stage of like, oh, but what if there is nothing to fix? What if this is just life now, right? And it's not about healing, even. It's not about getting better. It's not about fixing. It's just living, right? And dealing with the reality of being human. That there are moments of loss, there are moments of grief, there are moments of hardship, and there are moments of joy and beauty and meaning and purpose and positivity. And holding all of this to be true and having the capacity to do that, and then to match our energy levels and our working styles to the situation, to have our worth is inherent in who we are. So that's not changing, that's foundational. Like this is the spaces, like we have not designed our culture to match the reality of being human.
no, no, it's more about being a machine of some sort. And always about how can I make a profit from that, or how can somebody make a profit from that? So, if we all turned around and were like, I think I'm pretty good exactly as I am. Don't need any face creams, no more personal growth courses, nothing, then the world would change quite radically. And like I have done things that have really, really helped me to live a better life, to enjoy my life more, which is kind of what I feel like the point of any kind of growth should really be is if, in order to enjoy my life more and to be more myself, those tend to be the things that I go for now. But there is definitely an element in there of kind of um, you can capitalize on people who feel like they need to be fixed, you know.
I think we have forgotten what it feels like a lot of the time to be satisfied and to
Mm,
like feel that sense of like satiety and like completeness and enoughness. And this is in so many different dimensions. I mean, I've spent the last few years certainly looking for my own personal journey at unlearning diet culture and really reconnecting to my body. And actually, when do I feel like I've had enough? At what point is that? What is it?
mm,
What do it even sense like? And this goes wider too. We don't know what enoughness is. And
yeah.
this is because we are built in a world that is built on scarcity, that constantly sells us scarcity, that says you do not have enough, you are not enough yourself, you need to be more, do more, have more, faster, quickly, now. So I think
Mm,
reclaiming this is like this really radical act to say, no, okay, things are enough. And it's okay if some things aren't enough, right? It's okay if we're like, no, I want more here. Like, that's okay if that is genuine and real. But it's where that more is coming from. Is it coming from that place of scarcity within ourselves? Is it coming from desire? Is it coming from a sense of like greed and needing to control or having this little bit of power over situation? Is it very fear-based? what is actually happening? And will you know when you actually have enough?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely been having a thought recently of we need to move away from the idea of abundance and to instead be thinking about enough. What is
Mm,
enough? Um, because we don't live on an infinite planet, so we can't all continually be seeking
mm.
abundance, you know. Um,
And what
yeah,
is enough will look different for every single person,
yeah.
right? This is the thing, it's a
Mm,
very deeply personal question. And it also depends on
mm,
the context of what we're talking. Are we talking about money? Are we talking then about, well, if we're talking about resources, are we talking about community? Are we talking
mm,
about, having stronger communal bonds? Are we talking about connection? All of these
yeah,
things will have different answers. But it's starting to notice in our body, in our physical bodies, in the tangible, what does enoughness feel like? That's why I love the work actually I mentioned with food, because it's so easy to practice each day, and yet amazing how disconnected we are often from.
yeah, yes. And, also we have the companies out there who are deliberately creating products that bypass our satiety, so that we will just keep on consuming. Yeah,
Absolutely. Because again, growth is the goal,
yeah,
even within our food systems, right?
yeah.
Everything just needs to be growing. Everything needs to be making more money. Everything needs to be heading in this upwards linear direction.
Mm,
When I talk about getting free, I did give the real embodied answer that I think it comes back to, of checking in with our bodies, of noticing what we're feeling and choosing something different.
yeah,
But I do think that there is another angle as well. And that is, I think, in asking these questions of who benefits.
mm,
When I am exhausted, when I have nothing left, when I feel like I just need to keep on pushing, who benefits? A lot of people, the automatic answer will be like, well, nobody benefits, right? Surely no one benefits when I'm spent and have nothing left. I don't think that's true. I think that there are power structures that benefit. I think there are systems that benefit. I think there are people that benefit. And so starting to interrogate this, who or what misses out, right? Who
mm,
loses when you're like
yeah,
this?
yeah,
What are you missing? What do you lose when you feel exhausted? Is it your creativity? Because I can tell you now, at this point in the world, we need creativity and imagination to be one of the biggest skills that we have.
yeah,
We can ask, what would feel liberatory? What would feel liberatory in our
mm,
body? What's going to let our shoulders come down? What's going to let our chest open? What's going to go, ah? These really simple things that we do naturally throughout the day, which is just our body's wisdom talking to us.
mm,
And we can interrogate all of these questions to start to free ourselves a bit. I think the more that we realize that these experiences are not just individual problems, but these relate to the structures that we live in, to the culture that we live in, to the systems that we are a part of, that people are benefiting from this, and that not only are we suffering as individuals, but collectively the planet is suffering, then I think that that moment or that release from these thought patterns becomes a little bit clearer.
absolutely. Like one of my mantras is question everything. Like
Right? Yes.
just once you start questioning things, you can't stop. You are like, hang on a minute. Like I'm definitely so I go to the supermarket at the moment. I'm like, who made this? Where was it made? How was it made? Okay, it's not very helpful, to have this level of thought over every single purchase, but I feel like it's a realization of I've been completely not thinking about this um, for a long time. And that's how the earth has got itself into this pickle. Well,
Hmm.
not, it hasn't got itself into a pickle at all. I take that back. That it's humans who've created the pickle that the earth is in. Um, because we just haven't been asking those questions. Hang on a minute, like who made this? Did somebody have to die for this to be made? Like, um, so they're uncomfortable questions sometimes, but we have to start asking them.
They are, and I think these three questions of who or what benefits, who or what suffers or misses out, and
Mm,
what would feel liberatory or joyous or connecting or whatever word we want to use are really good entry questions here as well. They just help us to start to assess the power in a certain situation, to start to see a wider perspective. But questions have this, incredible freeing effect. I often think we have a world that has so many answers to the crises that we're facing. We know what to do for so many of the problems that we have. Like we
Yeah.
have incredible minds. We put man on the moon. We forget how actually mind-blowing that is, that humans have been to the moon. Like we are an absolutely amazing species. But what we don't
Mm.
have is good questions to facilitate our right use of those answers. We don't have the wisdom to be able to use the technology that we have. So, cultivating the right questions, developing this wisdom, developing this interrogation or this kind of assessment of a situation, these are skills for this time, no matter what it is that we do in the world, whatever our profession is. I think that these are tools that help us to become deeper, more loving, humans with greater capacity.
Yeah, I think it takes courage to ask questions as well in a society that doesn't encourage the asking of questions, the asking of uncomfortable questions.
It
And
absolutely doesn't.
yeah, and something coming to mind, you might not know the answer to this at all, but it's always something that I'm thinking of. We talk about like the systems and people benefiting. Do you have any thoughts on what do you think that there are people out there who actively know, okay, I'm going to perpetuate this system because it's going to benefit me in some way and not other people? Or is it less conscious than that?
Yes, I do think that exists.
Mm,
And I'm hesitant. Yes, I absolutely do think that that exists. And I also think that these people and that mindset is a product of the system. There it's
yeah,
very easy to, and I will say that there are people who benefit from a system. I will call that out. But I also think that it's easy to fall back on othering, that other people are the problem. And
yeah,
that if we just get rid of these other people with that mindset, then we'd be fine. Forgetting that that itself is part of the problem. That itself is the mindset that we're trying to disrupt. So while there are people who I believe knowingly benefit from these systems, who knowingly exploit the planet, who knowingly cause harm to others,
yeah,
I think there are a vast amount of them. I think that that too is rooted in pain and trauma and suffering and the belief in the world that says this is just the way things are and you need to fight to get ahead. It is still rooted in the story. And so, unless we are disrupting the story rather than the person, we're going to end up in that cycle of violence or in that cycle of harm that so often we see in the world. So I think interrogate it and start to question it because it gives us agency around where do we spend our money? Who do we vote for?
yeah,
Who do we make connections with? And don't ever assume that the person that you're opposing is the problem themselves.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I kind of always think of each person, naming no names, as just as a little baby. Like that person was a little baby once, and that little baby did not arrive in this world with the intention of destroying the planet or hurting other people. Um, and so it's conditioning. Like you say,
I
it's
think,
the system that's conditioning.
yeah, and sorry to interrupt there.
No,
I
it's okay.
think we're all products of the environment that we grew up in.
Mm, yeah.
Within their model of the world, within the way they see the world, the way that they act is entirely justifiable. I think it
Mm,
is impossible for us to say that without those exact experiences, without those same messaging, without those same stories, those same formative experiences, that somehow we would be different. So we're all just making sense of what it means to be alive. And some stories around what it means to be alive are far more helpful than others. Ones that say that we are connected, ones that say the earth is a living being, ones that say that, we are part of something and that we can create something better, that we're a creative species. Or we have stories that say that it's about survival of the fittest, that we're all islands, that it's
Mm.
a dog eat dog world, that, shame is something that we can leverage for power. These are other stories that exist, and you can use them. They're just not going to unlock our highest potential. And I don't think they're going to serve us as our well-beings as humans or our well-being as a planet.
Yeah.
But
And
the people who use
yeah.
them are just people.
Yeah. And those stories, those worldviews are rooted in fear and scarcity, which is what's at the root of the systems and the structures that we currently live in. So it's yeah.
And that's when we return to this chicken or egg thing.
Yeah.
Exactly what we're talking about. Like, is it the system that came first that created and these structures and these mindsets, or is it the mindsets that created the system? And I think it's a bit of both. They
Mm.
kind of feed off of each other. And so somewhere when we're talking about system change, and this is any system, right? Cultural systems, political systems, economic systems, whether we're talking about capitalism, patriarchy, separation, white supremacy, we are talking about a story that underpins all of these. That the
Mm.
more work we can do to unlearn that story within ourselves, the less power that system holds, the less ability it has to kind of recapture itself and like reformulate itself. I think that all of these systems and their self-fulfilling feedback loops, right, of burnout being one, perfectionism and imposter syndrome, I think is another, both deeply rooted in messages that are given to women, and particularly women of color and women from different backgrounds around, yeah, but do you really belong here? Are you sure you do? Are you actually good enough, or do you need like to look a little bit different? Does
Mm.
your body need to be a bit different? Are you smart enough? Did you say things the right way? Are you coming off with the right perspective? No wonder people experience this. But there
Yeah.
are feedback loops that hold the system. That is the best way to look at them. When I am exhausted, I can't challenge it. When I'm
Yeah.
second guessing and doubting myself, I can't challenge it. When I believe the lie of separation that says that I am an island and that we're all separate and it's survival of the fittest and it's a competition and dog eat dog world, I feel powerless. And I think, who am I to do anything? My vote doesn't matter. I'm one person. Or I see power as a commodity and I hold it and I wield it over others because I'm going to take whatever power I can and I'm going to make sure that I keep it and I use it. So the more we free ourselves from these mindsets and we start to embrace, as we're talking about reciprocity, connectivity, mindfulness, time with our body, time with joy, the system weakens. It loses the feedback loop. And
Yeah.
so that's the change making perspective of this that I think is really important.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And again, it takes courage and it takes perseverance, I would say, because we still have to live in the system at the same time as trying to dismantle the system, which is something that I think we're all going to have to deal with over the next few years. Okay, I need to try and dismantle it, but I've also got to exist in it and find a way to survive, and also start envisioning what might be a different system, because that's also, as humans, we don't like uncertainty, and it's like, okay, well, if I dismantle this thing, what's the next thing? I don't know. Yeah.
Oh,
It's
absolutely. I think this
yeah.
is where that idea of like real gentleness comes in, that this isn't a one-time thing, it's a journey.
Mhm.
And where we are in that journey, we'll have different work. If we're in like the pit of burnout, our work is not going to be imagining new systems and, it's not even doing this for the collective reasons. It's like, just starting to connect again with my body. It's just like, yeah, this here. Okay, hi, this is very uncomfortable. Yeah, no wonder
Yeah.
it's probably very tight and tense. If we've been burnt out and we've started to come out of it and we're reassessing our lives and we know that we don't want to go back to the same thing, that's a different stage again. Okay, well, where am I? I think maybe I want to start bringing in my creativity perhaps for my personal life or my connection to my inner world to say, yeah, what is it that I really want to do? What's that trust thing with that little voice I have that's giving me those ideas? Perhaps once we're following that, we're further along our journey, then it's like, oh yeah, you know what? Okay, so we need to start thinking more broadly as a collective, as a community. What are our systems? How can we reimagine them? Who am I
Mm.
in relationship with? In the coming years, certainly as we move through the next 10 to 15 years, and we start to see more and more disruptions to the world we're living in, either through global conflicts, through disaster events, through perhaps political alliances, there will be major changes to the way that we're living. Where is our food coming from?
Yeah.
Who do I need to be? Where's our trade networks coming from? What do people need? Do we have a space to actually get to know one another? There's so many different things we can be doing. That's when the reimagination starts to come in. So there is a
Mm.
different stage and a different spectrum for all of these.
Yeah. We've got work to do. Yeah.
We do. We do. But this is also, it's the work of this time.
Yeah.
It is, I think, I heard somebody the other day refer to it as a duty.
Mm.
And I think that that is, depending on where we are in that burnout cycle,
Yeah.
a beautiful idea that this
Mm.
is the work of being human in this time. And that
Yeah.
although it is hard and uncomfortable and challenging and uncertain and scary, it also holds possibility. It also holds the potential to be something that is actually really meaningful and really life-giving. And that's something that we can be proud of, and I think that we can work towards and be hopeful about.
Yeah. Yes, I heard. I don't know if you know the work of Daniel Schmachtenberger at all. Yeah,
No.
he's kind of brain the size of a planet. But yeah, he talks a lot about systems and energy and ecology, and he said something along the same lines, like it's our duty, and like you say, everyone's at different stages. But I think personally, I feel like our souls chose to incarnate in this particular moment for this moment. So yeah, it's about, I think as well, collective, remembering it's a collective. It's not one person is not going to make this change at all. So it's lots and lots of individuals coming together to make the change.
These problems do not rest on your shoulders alone or my shoulders alone. It's
Mm.
too much. It
Yeah.
is absolutely about kind of handing that back and then freeing ourselves enough so that we can collaborate,
Mm.
communicate, build these networks that we need to be having. And I agree. I think this is soul work for this time.
Yeah. So on that note, if people wanted to find you and say, help, help me, how would they do that? What kind of who do you work with? How can people work with you? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so as I say, I tend to work with change makers and climate leaders, but anybody who has a vision of a more just and regenerative world, this is your space. My website is laurahartley.com. I have some new ventures starting in the new year, some new programs, new workshops, new courses. So all of those will be live or accessible on the website. My Instagram is at laura.h.hartley, and I'm also on LinkedIn if that is your space.
Perfect. And yeah, I can vouch for, yeah, it's definitely would be a good move for people to reach out and work with you. Because yeah, we all need a little bit of help to navigate these times, and to navigate what's going on for us personally as we start to awaken to all of these systems that need to be changed. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me on and for what your podcast offers in this time. I think these conversations matter. This is part of the work. And so I'm very grateful to that you have this platform for this.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming on. I think I'm going to go back and listen to it again to get lots of nuggets of wisdom out of it. It's a lot to digest, so I hope that people will, yeah, if you're listening, please don't feel like you need to grasp all of this straight away if you're brand new to it. Just know this is a first step, and that there's your next step will appear. Um, that's how it's worked for me so far, anyway. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more from you and your new ventures in the new year, and staying connected.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.